Hi there. I'm Dr. Michelle Sengera, and I'm presenting to you from Toronto, Ontario, in Canada, on behalf of York University and the work that we do here in terms of redefining success and looking at assessment and evaluation as an opportunity to build connections as opposed to competition. Not to say competition is bad, but can we use our measures of what does success look and sound like to help build connections between the learner and themselves, the learner and society, and ultimately the learner and the natural world around them. So let's dive in. I'm sure I'm not the only one here that understands that we are built for connection. So physically, neurobiologically, my background is in developmental psychology and neurobiological mechanisms for learning. And our brain is built for connection because it's what's helped our species to survive, right? There's strength in numbers. And it's proven very true for our species. So we are predisposed cognitively to want to be together and forge connections. And then psychologically, our identity and our reality, what it means axiologically and ontologically in our world to be who we are, is innately connected to the relationships that we form over time. So the relationships we have with ourselves, the relationship, hopefully there's only one of us in there, the relationship we have to ourselves and the relationship we have to those around us, as well as to our natural surroundings. It's so easy for us to forget, but we are mammals. We are part of the natural world. And nature seeks out symbiosis. Whether we're talking about a plant that flowers, needing the flying insects to pollinate, the classic sea anemone and the clownfish, the Finding Nemo metaphor, or the fascinating research that Suzanne Simard out of the University of British Columbia is doing in regards to forests and how trees talk to each other through the fungi, the fungal systems that are beneath the surface of the ground. So we're all connected and we are part of nature, and nature naturally is seeking out symbiosis and this connection building. Imagine if we could build systems of education that embody those same dynamic principles of interaction and symbiosis, harmony. What kind of resilient capacity could we build in the human species? What kind of responsiveness and capacity for innovation could we build if we looked at these natural systems, worked with our natural instincts in how we built the systems of education? Imagine. So why do we have to imagine? What's currently not working in our systems of education? Well, obviously, if we look at the industrialized models, we look at transmissive forms of education, where elements of competitiveness, isolation, individualism, which is not to say any of these things are bad, but we've gone to a certain extreme in the industrialized form of education, which has served to reiterate our separateness. This model has been challenged, but right now, it has never been so disrupted as right now, where how people were engaging with teaching and learning was drastically different just in the recent past. So could this represent an opportunity to address some of what we consider to be wrong in the current systems? And if we define what's wrong in terms of not supporting connectedness, can we look at this current disruptive phase as an opportunity to revolutionize the education systems towards community and connectiveness? There are three main levers, I call them, in terms of the teaching and learning practice that we could pull on in terms of creating some of this disruption. So the first is what we teach, curriculum. The second is pedagogy, how we teach. And the third is assessment, why we teach. What are our definition and measures of success? So we've got the what, the how, and the why. Three levers that we could pull in terms of changing the current systems of education and shifting them towards connectedness. So let's dive into the what. At York University, some of the prototypes that we've been running in terms of what a course could look like, the future of a course could look like in terms of the technology available and this idea of promoting more compassion, connection, and community. When it comes to the curriculum, the what, that we're trying to teach, we have shifted to allow for more choice in terms of navigation pathways for learners. So maybe not everybody needs to learn the same thing in the same order. And let's disrupt that linearity of content, right? Self-paced options, pathways through content. When it comes specifically to the organization of an instructor's content, we're also challenging them to look at theorists such as Gloria Ladson-Billings out of the University of Wisconsin-Michigan, who looks at culturally relevant ways of teaching. So what are the current representations of race, culture, language, as you've depicted them? What's the story you're telling with your content? Can we look to shift some of the systematic discrimination and oppression that can often exist in textbooks or content that's been drafted with a patriarchal colonial viewpoint? And can we look at becoming more culturally relevant and looking for where systematic discrimination and oppression might be present and how to make it more culturally relevant? Are you talking about indigeneity? Are you talking about connections to the natural world? Not just real world connections, but the connection of your content area to the natural world. All these prompts and questions in terms of challenging instructors who have, at the higher education level, working in the university setting, traditionally looked at their content as chapters in a textbook, weeks on a syllabus. Now let's dive into the how, the pedagogy, where rubber meets the road, right? This is where we want to start moving away from transmission of content. I've got something in my head, and the work I'm doing is to bring that information to your head and shift more towards transformational pedagogy. So instead of transmitting the ideas of others, we transform that paradigm in order to allow students, learners, the opportunity to co-create meaning based on their circumstances, their personality, their real-world experiences, in harmony with resources, literary references, and scholarly research that we present. Are you asking students to go outside? Say, it's important to connect to nature. Nature helps us think. Walking meditations, forest bathing, all of these things contribute to our ability to open our minds and think creatively. Also, being out in the symbiotic natural world, even if your content area isn't natural science, allows for students to see the symbiotic systems that exist in the natural world, and that modeling of natural symbiotic systems thinking around them can support their systems thinking in terms of analysis and research of your content area with the goal of producing something in this activity. Which leads me to another and our last point in terms of the how. We can, through our pedagogy, promote connection to self, to society, and to nature is through compassionate communication. This is the transition from pedagogy to assessment in terms of when you value something and you're providing a grade to a student, a big key element of assessment is the communication of that, the how of it, both in terms of expressing clearly the instructions that you have for success in this assignment. What are you looking for? What are the parameters? What's the procedure in terms of submission? All of that good stuff, which we usually offload to being very cold and dry. And then the second is in terms of after the assignment has been submitted and graded, how are you communicating to that student? Which really brings us to the why of assessment in a connected system of education, which is growth oriented. So very traditionally, we have a proficiency-based model of assessment, right? We give you an exam or a quiz that figures out, we think, what you know, the knowledge assets you have on this particular topic at this one slice in time. As everybody who's ever crammed for a final exam in their life knows, you know it when you take the exam. You do it, you regurgitate all the answers, and then you leave and you forget it almost immediately. So proficiency measures are not actually very good gauges of what you know. They're only really good gauges of what you know in that 2 hours when you're sitting the exam. So what we would like to see happen in the field of education, and what we believe at York University is the future of authentic assessment, which is a term we hear a lot, is growth-oriented measures, which means I need to gauge then proficiency at multiple times as a gauge of growth. So at the beginning, where are you at? What do you know? What are your questions? Where are your strengths? Where are your challenges? The diagnostic assessments at the beginning, multiple formative assessments throughout the course, and then a summative assessment at the end in terms of where are you at after we've had this amount of time together. So these are the three components of assessment that we want to see: diagnostic, formative, and summative. And they are being measured in such a way as to encourage and inspire lifelong learning, because you're not finished acquiring that skill in this one course. You're going to continue to develop critical thinking. You're going to continue to develop your communication skills, your understanding of natural science or earthquakes or fault lines. You're going to continue to develop that understanding. What we want to do at a course level is not only paint a picture and provide a product in terms of a grade, but emphasize to our students the value of process. And that happens with these components that we're looking at over time throughout a course experience. Everything comes down to how we define and measure success. So if we can start with our assessment structures and value what's valuable in terms of assigning grades to interacting in the natural environment, working with a peer on the creation of a project outline before you go off on your own and finish the project yourself, asking for reflective, critical thinking in terms of development of skill acquisition, not just in terms of how they're experiencing the course content. We are teaching students to value connections to self, connections to society, and connections to nature. The most important thing to remember is you're not alone. We're still doing the research, we're studying these things, we're sharing them on platforms such as this. We know that what we want to do is promote connection in the world that we're living in, and teaching and learning is the domain area that I have chosen. I hope that this presentation has proven useful, because how we define and measure success, whether in our personal or our professional lives, teaches people around us to value what we consider to be valuable. And in a world today that has a very capitalist-focused value system, perhaps if we can use education and emphasize through grading and marks and evaluation that connecting to yourself, to the society around you, and to your natural surroundings is, in fact, what will help our human species remain as versatile and valuable as we are in the future that is to come. Thank you again for taking the time to listen to my presentation, and feel free to reach out at the email on the screen should you have any questions or you want to keep the conversation going.